of the tour. Okay, welcome everybody again. I was just doing a bit of um, pre-talk just to fill the time. We wait. I see Felix has arrived. Welcome. See some friends, people I don't know. I'm really happy. A lot of my friends share their invitation, so I'm really glad there's a lot of people here. And as I was saying, feel free if you want to join in to ask a question or say something, or even a personal memory or something. You can raise your hand, and there's a button there. You can raise your hand, and you can just open your mic and talk. Just one thing: if your question or thing you want to say is not related to what I'm talking, if you could just wait till the end of the tour, which is also live on Facebook. Okay, it's 9:30, so I think we all ready to go. Let's give it just another minute so people can just join in. Welcome everybody. There's some people that I haven't seen in years, so I'm really glad that we're able to join this tour. And I'm Mario Bernardi of the Grand Tour Europe. Let's see if I have a little leaflet. Yeah, you know it because you received the email. And make yourself comfortable because this is a very friendly chat. I'll be talking in a very friendly way. Enjoy a good glass of wine if you can. And that's why this is in the afternoon in America, in the evening in Europe. So it's a drink time. And so today I'll be giving you a virtual tour about the secrets of the Sistine Chapel. Of course, I'll be talking about the Sistine Chapel in general, especially those of you who haven't been there yet. But I will be also, let me just close. I'll be also giving you some insights and some secrets, some perspective, trying to get like behind the frescoes, trying to get in the artist's minds, in the Pope's head, and try to understand what the Sistine Chapel is about, how it came to be the most important and most famous chapel in the world. Now, I think we can start. Yeah, people can join in later on. So the connection is open, so if you want, if your connection goes down, you'll be able to join in again, so it'll be open till the end. Now I'll share the screen, and I'll be using basically three media. I'll be using Google Earth or Google Maps, whichever works. Google Earth sometimes doesn't work very well, and this 3D image of the Sistine Chapel, which is provided by the Vatican Museum official website, museivaticani.va. You're free to go afterwards, and you can just play with them. There's a number of places within the Vatican Museum that you can visit and you can actually walk. And the amazing thing about this thing, the resolution and the quality is really good, but also you are there by yourself, which is something that's really, really, unique, because most of the time when you're there, if you go there very early in the morning, there's already a bunch of people there. The only man that gets to see it like this every day is the clavigero, is the man that has the keys, about 3,000 keys that open and close every door in the Vatican museums and in the Sistine Chapel. The Sistine Chapel is part of the Vatican Museum now, but it was originally the chapel of the popes inside, or the main chapel of the popes, one of many chapels that are part of the Vatican complex. Let's get an overview and see it from Google Earth. Of course, Vatican City, it's in central Rome. We have there, it's the smallest independent country in the world, although it's one of the most powerful and influential, because of course, the Pope, besides being the spiritual leader of the Catholics, is also the head in chief of the Catholic Church. So I don't think this is working very well. Let's get on the. Is it working? It's not working. Let me just see. So let's use a picture then. This is the outside of Sistine Chapel, and it's always make me think, like, if you look at it from the outside, it looks just like a kind of a fortress rather than like a church or a chapel. It should be. Let me see if we can just get back to this again. I think the Google Earth is freeze. Let me just close it. I can see other people joining now. Ah. Here we are. So this, now it works. So this is the outside of the Sistine Chapel. And one thing, this is a picture taken from the top of the dome. You can see there's a walkway outside, and there is like a kind of fortified wall all around, with also these walls diagonal. They're called contraforti. They're meant to keep up the chapel. The chapel has a weakness in the foundation, and it tends to open like in two parts, and this has influenced the work of Michelangelo. So basically both sides, they tend to sink a little bit. The outside wall, the southern and the northern walls, they tend to sink, so they basically to crack it open in half. But the story I want to tell you tonight starts actually in 1979, beginning of 1980, where there was just a routine cleaning of the chapel. This man here that you see is Gianluigi Colalucci, was the head of the restoration team of the Vatican Museums and the Sistine Chapel. He was the man in charge of cleaning, repairing, restoring any artifact within the Vatican collections. And one day there was a damage on a wall on one of the lower sets of frescoes. Now, inside the Sistine Chapel, you see there are basically three different sets of frescoes. There's the bottom ones, which are these curtains painted in the 1400s. The middle ones painted again around between 1478, 79 and 1483 by Botticelli, Perugino, Ghirlandaio, a few other important artists, and I will talk about that as well. And then there's the last level with the popes, plus, of course, the ceiling by Michelangelo. So the walls were made soon after the chapel was built in 1477 under Pope Sixtus IV, which also gave the name to it, the Sistine Chapel. That's why it's called the Pope Sixtus Chapel, basically. And these frescoes had episodes of the life of Christ and episodes of the life of Moses on the other side, and we'll talk about that too. So the wall, this is the entrance wall. This leads into the Sala Reggia, inside the private quarters of the Vatican City. So this is like a room that is used for official meetings and not open to the general public. Colalucci was restoring this part here, this image of the popes down here, and he came across the picture of Eleazar, one of the ancestors of Christ, that Michelangelo painted. Those large guys sitting up on the top of the chapel, which are about 60 figures, the ancestors of Jesus Christ. And this was very dark and covered with a very thick level of oils and dirt and smoke and dust since, you know, the early 1500s when it was made. So there was dust of over 400 years. Colalucci had a moment of a genius idea. He saw all this dirt and he said, since I'm repairing this, why don't I have just a look at the color here, what I can find? So he put a bit of saliva on a little a napkin and started to just scrape it off. And you can see this is the restoration a few years later while he was restoring the figure of Adam. You can see the difference between the smoke and the dark and the dirt part here and the part that's been cleaned here. It's completely different. And the aspect is completely different. And later on, I'll show you how the chapel looked like before it was clean. It looked like this. It was dark. He had a complete different effect on the spectators. You thought that Michelangelo was somebody really that had a big depression and really thought that, you know, the vision of the creation and especially judgment was this a moment full of terror and darkness and depression. While nowadays you have this complete opposite bright image of the chapel, which this has led to a lot of discussion and speculation among the scholars, and I will talk about that too. Anyway, so Colalucci starts his campaign to clean And then the Pope said, okay, let's try a bit. The Pope at that time was John Paul II, very strong and determined Pope. And it was thanks to him that the restoration went ahead. And this beautiful blonde man came out with these beautiful blonde colors, big white shirt, something they haven't seen before because it was all covered with dirt and smoke. They thought it was mostly the smoke of the candles. Although a number of scholars and artists started to campaign to stop the restoration because they thought they would have ruined the finishing, shading and chiaroscuro, the darkening, made actually with candle smoke. That was a technique used in the fresco as well there to give a bit of depth. But the restorations went on, and about 15 years later, the ceiling was uncovered, and it was that amazing vision that we have today with the creation in the ceiling. Now, with God creating, separating dark and light, creating the planets, and creating Adam and then Eve. Now, I will use some high-resolution pictures to talk about some details. Now, in an hour time, it's impossible to describe every single element, but I'll give you a complete overview. Anyway, after the ceiling, also the sides were restored, and what came into light is a number of details that were impossible to be seen before, and I'll be talking about them before. First, let me give you a general idea of how the chapel was painted. So between 1478, 79, and 1483, the best artists from Florence were sent to Rome by Lorenzo Magnifico to be to decorate the chapel of the Pope. These guys were Botticelli, the famous author of the Spring and the Birth of Venus, and then Ghirlandaio, Perugino, and Cosimo Rosselli, and many others, about 10 different artists, the best Florentine artists of the 1500s. They worked for about 4 years, painting all the episodes of the life of Moses on the left side and the life of Christ on the other side. Why the life of Christ and the life of Moses? Well, because Moses started Judaism, and so it was the beginning of the process that is called as the history of salvation, the relationship between God and mankind that actually started with the creation. And then the second step is this one with the come of Jesus Christ. Now, how all this is going to end up, of course, with the church. So the popes are painted as well in the chapel, and I'll show you. So Jesus Christ on the right, Christian name is Jesus Christ by Perugino, and opposite, again, Perugino, first episodes of the life of Moses, the circumcision of the son of Moses, and so on. And then Botticelli with the Moses and the daughters of Jethro, and the Temptation of Christ by Cosimo Rosselli. And we have then the popes also painted here. Actually, with this tool, we could do something that is not been possible to do by the public for at least the last 100 years, and which means going up on the windows. We're actually on the windowsill here, and there are graffiti here on the walls made by visitors that were allowed to go up here in the 1700s and 1800s during the Grand Tour age of travel, when there were only, small groups of VIP travelers. Most of them were poets, artists, and nobles. And amongst them also Wolfgang Goethe, the famous German poet, came up here to this height. This is about 50 meters high, and from here you could actually see very well the fresco without having to break your neck. So it was the Grand Tour given back then. Special guests were allowed up there. Now it's not possible, also because there's the air conditioning unit up here. And also there are about 7,000 LED lights, which is very new system, is being made about 5-6 years ago. Anyway, this is the creation of Adam here by Michelangelo. And these are the prophets and the Sibyls. So again, the connection between Judaism and Christianism, and also paganism, because the Sibyls, they represented the prophecies of the pagans. There are about 7 prophets and 5 Sibyls. And there's about 60 figures of the ancestors of Jesus Christ from King David, to prove that Jesus Christ was of the descendants of the kings of Israel. And of course, the Last Judgment to the right. Now, if we can go down again, I would like to talk to you a little bit more about the 15th century frescoes. This is Ghirlandaio's The Calling of Disciples, Matthew and sorry, Peter and Andrew. And this was, Ghirlandaio was the master of Michelangelo. Michelangelo is a teenager working in workshop of this artist, as well as Botticelli and Perugino were the greatest artists of that time. What happened is, like, a couple of years before the chapel was finished, there was an attempt to murder Lorenzo il Magnifico, the Lord of Florence, and his brother. Lorenzo survived, but Giuliano de' Medici was assassinated by the Congiura dei Pazzi, which is very famous episode. The Pope Sixtus was on the side of the Pazzi. He tried to supported this kind of murder to take this kind of coup to take the power from the Medici, because at that time in Italy, every country, and the church was an independent state at the time, Tuscany, Venice, Milan, King of Naples, they were all at war with each other. They are called the Italian Wars, which lasted from the end of the 15th century till 1559. So in this scenario, they were all allied and enemies more or less at the same time. So after Lorenzo survived, he made a deal with the Pope, and to show that he was thankful to the Pope and to regain peace, he actually sent his warrior, his best painters, to decorate the chapel. I'll show you a couple of these details because they are very beautiful. There is Botticelli's the first episode of the life of Moses and the daughters of Jethro. Look how beautiful the details are. These beautiful women. This is very similar to the Birth of Venus by Botticelli that you could find in the Uffizi. And this is as big as the spring, if not even a little bigger. And Moses and the burning bush, so the beginning of the pact between the Jews and God, and then Moses taking the Jews out of Egypt. There's the killing of the Egyptian, where Moses realized that the Jews were enslaved. Everything is depicted with a great level of details, gold elements, even a kind of a suggestion to the name and the coat of arms of Pope della Rovere, Pope Sixtus IV, which is this one. The oak tree. Rovere in Italian means oak tree, and the oak tree leaves, and there were also, you can't see in the picture, but also little, let me see, yeah, they're little, how do you call, acorns, made of wax and gilded, so they're three-dimensional. Actually, the picture doesn't show it, but they are actually 3D. And these were rediscovered after the restoration in about 15 years ago. They were lost. And then you see there's a little doggy here. See, a little white dog. This dog was actually the dog of one of the fellow painters of Botticelli, Cosimo Rosselli, who bought this dog to run with him, and it is painted in about 5 different scenes. So this same dog appears about 5 times. Let me see if I can show you again. This is the crossing of the Red Sea by Cosimo Rosselli, and the Red Sea is actually red, and there's a little doggy on the left again, and you will find in other scenes. The soldiers, the Egyptians, are dressed like contemporary soldiers, and the men in arms here with the armors and their coats of arms, they're actually portraits of contemporaries who won the Battle of Campomorto, which took place only 3 or 4 years before the fresco was made. And it was the papal troops who defeated the troops of the King of Naples, who were trying to invade Ravenna, going northern Italy, but they invaded the land of the Pope. Of course, the Pope wasn't happy at all of that, so he sent his army to defeat them. Now, there's 2 more scenes I want to show you because they're very important. About the episodes of Christ, this is Pietro Perugino's. Perugino was the master of Raphael, so it was basically his teacher. Represent the handling of the keys. Now, this is really one of the fundamental scenes in the Vatican, because the cross keys that can be seen and found all over the Vatican City, they symbolize the priesthood, the pact between Jesus Christ, Peter, and his church. The fact that in order to gain the kingdom of heavens, you have to go through the church. You have to go through the Pope. You have to go through the priest. There is no salvation outside the church. This is very important because a few decades later, Martin Luther started to challenge that. And that's how Protestantism and Lutheranism started. But the Pope always had groups within the church who tried to escape from the authority of the Pope, from the authority of the Catholic Church. And so this was one of the ongoing challenges inside the Catholic Roman Church. Now, in the last restorations, they found the level of details, like here in this gold part, they are the letters PE, Perugino. So it's like a signature of Perugino who signed the thing. And also there can be found some contemporaries, like, so according to some scholars, this is Perugino himself, or probably Vicino Orsini, who is not 100% clear, but anyway, it could be him. So his self-portrait. And then here we have two men that are clearly builders, you know. And so it's basically it's Baccio Pontelli, one of them, which was the engineer who designed, the architect who designed the Sistine Chapel. So the builders of the chapel also were portrayed here, because of course there was a chapel before called Cappella Magna, but it was which also had frescoes. We know they were made in the 1300s, but then it was rebuilt completely new by Sixtus IV. In the background there, this beautiful Renaissance architecture, the octagonal baptistry, the triumphal arches. Of course, Perugino coming to Rome was really impressed by the Roman art, and it wasn't the only one. There would have been also other artists here. For example, Botticelli. Which was also the one in charge of coordinating them all. But Botticelli didn't really like Rome. When his father died in 1481, so only after a year or a year and a half being working in the Sistine Chapel, he went back to Florence because his father died. And then he said to Lorenzo Medici, I'm not going back to Rome. I'm staying in Florence. So he never left Florence again. I mean, not permanently anyway. He never went back to Rome. He saw, though, the Arch of Constantine, which is represented here, and some other Roman ruins. This is the Settizodio, was a fountain built in the 2nd century AD, which is by the Palatine Hill, which is not existing anymore, unfortunately. And it represents, this scene is the punishment of Korah and his children, which tried to stone Moses. So they tried to revolt against the religious authority. And the Pope wanted this message to come across really well. Now, in many documentaries, including it's very famous in Italy, Alberto Angela, but it's a like television show. He starts his description. He also wrote a book about that. Many art historians, they consider the frescoes the Bible of the poor, which is true for churches open to the public or churches for the people, for the community, like a parish church, a cathedral. But this is a chapel. A chapel is a church which is only destined to the use of those who live in the building or his guests or their guests. So this is the chapel of the Pope. The common people, poor people, illiterate people, were not allowed in the chapel. The chapel was for the papal courts, cardinals, theologians, philosophers, artists, people with a really high education. So this fresco had a very specific and complex religious meaning. So the punishment is down at the end, and it's a clear message, together with also the handling of the keys that we spoke before. In fact, is the one opposite to it, because it tells the story of Moses and Aaron. Aaron was his brother. No, it's not this one. Let me close this one. Aaron was his brother, and they punished them by sending them down to hell. And you could see that Moses down here and Aaron, they are not just brothers, they're twins. They have the same face. And Aaron is wearing the tiara, the conic hat that it was the crown of the popes with the 3 different tires. So this message is, you cannot question the authority of the popes, or you get punished by God. And even here in the triumphal arch, it said in Latin, Nemo sibi assumat honorem nisi vocatus adeo tanquam Aaron, which everybody, I think, is fluent in Latin here, so you might have... you want me to translate it? Yeah. So I'm kidding. Nobody will assume this honor of the priesthood if not called by God as well as Aaron was. So you need a clear entitlement to be a spiritual leader. Now, in the scene as well, there are a number of contemporaries painted in these characters, including in the background, this ship arriving from abroad. This one here, I don't have a clear picture here, but this white one has a lily of Florence in the center, is the flag of Florence. It represents the Florentine artists that came here. This kind of little symbols are called in Italian cryptomanie. There are a few others. They are little hidden messages, like cryptic, no? They're hidden. And I'll show you a couple of them because they're very, very interesting. In the... This is Ghirlandaio christening of Jesus Christ. Sorry, Perugino christening of Christ, but it's not this one. the baptism of Christ is this one I wanted. So this is the speech of the mountain, and then we have Jesus Christ here, and then we have the healing of the leper to the right, and again a number of contemporaries, probably including the artist Rosselli himself. I was looking for a different one here, which is here. This is the Ghirlandaio one, and Ghirlandaio as well probably put himself in this crowds of contemporaries, and this is the Jesus Christ calling the disciple Peter and Andrew, telling, yeah, you fishers, I will make you fishing souls, so come and follow me. And they did. There's a beautiful background with this walled cities shaped the civilization, of course. And then on the left, there's this guy who has flowers in his head, a ghirlanda in Italian, ghirlandaio, ghirlanda of flower, a garland. So that's a cryptomania. That's his surname hidden into an object. And there's another one by Cosimo Rosselli, if I can find the detail. I don't prepare a presentation because I want to keep this fresh and flowing. So that's why I don't really, of course, the pictures have an order, but I don't put them in a presentation. Because it just makes you feel a bit. I get bored if I have a presentation. I prefer to just pull out all the things as they come. This is the symbol of Florence I wanted to show you before. This is the fleur de lis, the flag that is one on the mast of one of the ship. And then here there is another. This is the adoration of the golden calf. When Moses came down, he got really upset from Sinai with the 10 commandments and throw them in the cloud. And there's, of course, another representation of contemporaries, the Jews worshiping the golden calf. And down at the bottom in the frame, I'll show you what it is on the big one. It's right here. This fence, by the way, is it's like a fence between the part for the clergy, this one here, the bigger one, and the part from the no clergy of the non-consecrated people. So here there's the doggy, and then there is a little vase here. That's why I got the picture in detail, which is a vase with a brush and a red cup with some red paint, because this was painted by Rosselli. Rosso, it's red in Italian, so he's the signature of Rosselli. He's another cryptomania, is another one of these cryptic hidden messages. So when Michelangelo came across the chapel, before the chapel had just a blue ceiling with little stars, painted by Pier Matteo d'Amelia, which was a modest painter. And I have a drawing showing you how he was. Now, yeah, just little stars. The stars symbolize, of course, the harmony that is in the universe. It symbolizes basically the fact that there is like an order. There is like a project in God's mind. So that's why when years later, Pope Sixtus then died, and then there was a Pope Borgia, Rodrigo Borgia, which is known as a very religious man. And then after him, there was Pope Julius II. Pope Julius, I have a portrait here. He was the nephew of Pope Sixtus. So he became cardinal at a very young age. I have a very important fresco, which is preserved in Vatican, was in the Vatican Library, made by this artist Melozzo da Forlì by 1480, that represent Pope Sixtus, the one who built the Sistine Chapel, his nephew standing, Giuliano della Rovere, that then became, at the beginning of 1500, Pope Julius II. He is a very important pope because as his uncle started to refurbish Rome, build bridges, roads, rebuild the chapel, and build new stuff, he also decided to rebuild the Basilica of St. Peter. So he hired Donato Bramante, one of the greatest architects of the Renaissance, to tear down the old basilica and to rebuild a new one with the dome and with the project that we know today. So this fresco represents the uncle and the nephew, the cardinal, plus the secretaries of the Pope, and as well the Platina, which this guy here, which was the first librarian of the Vatican Library. In fact, this fresco was in the Vatican Library, which is an institution which was created in the 1400s by Sixtus IV, and is still working to this day, and is home to some 2 million books, including manuscripts, some of the most important, precious, and valuable manuscripts ever made. Anyway, the Pope asked Michelangelo to come to Rome and create a sculpture, a pyramid, a kind of sculpture representing, sorry, it's the wrong picture, representing the tomb of the Pope with about 40 statues that Michelangelo started to make. And he created about 7 of them, the Moses and about 6 so-called prisoners, at these kind of naked guys at the bottom. This is just an artist's impression. This is not Michelangelo's drawing. And this tomb should have stand tall in the center of the Basilica of St. Peter. But the reconstruction of the Basilica went very slow. The Pope was at war with the French. Of course, it's always the French when it's a war in the Renaissance. And there should be some French friends around. Let me see if they're around here. I can't find them. So basically, the Pope said to Michelangelo, "I can't pay you," and that's where it starts. All the fact that Michelangelo had kind of not really a fight, but he left Rome without the permission of the Pope, which of course upset the Pope and the court, because it was considered outrageous that the artist left his master and the Pope without permission and so on. Anyway, Michelangelo made this beautiful Moses for the tomb of the Pope in the Vatican. The tomb was never completed. Actually, in the Vatican, was completed about 40 years later by Michelangelo in a different church, St. Peter's in Chains, and can be seen in Rome now. It's by the Colosseum. Anyway, Michelangelo went back to Florence after 1506, and it took about 2 years of convincing. When the Pope said, Pope Julius is here. I have a picture. This is a portrait made by Raphael of the old Pope. So we saw him a young cardinal, and then a young. Look at these rings, and there's something. And so Raphael made this portrait of Pope Julius II because Raphael was working there at the same time. In fact, when the Pope said to Michelangelo, I don't have the money to finish the tomb and the statue. Plus, Bramante has convinced me that this is really bad luck to build your own tomb in your lifetime. Let my successor take care of that. I want to paint the chapel, the ceiling of the chapel that had some cracks and some damage in the ceiling, and also the sides frescoes were damaged as well, the one on the shorter walls, on the eastern and the western wall. So Michelangelo said no. And then after a bit of convincing, he said, okay, yes, I'll do it. And the Pope said, okay, you paint the disciples of our Lord on the ceiling. And Michelangelo said no. And he came up with this grand vision, 9 frames with the creation of Adam, of which I have a couple of details. I'm not describing them all. I just show you a couple because that's very, very interesting. And there's this can make us possible to go inside the head of Michelangelo, what he was thinking when he was doing that. First of all, I wanted to show you before and after the restoration, if I can find it here, and not I found it later. Let's use this one here. No, maybe this is one. Okay, so we have Adam here, of course, naked. And in the Bible, it says that God modeled him from clay and then breathed through his nostrils. But here, there's not breathing in the nostrils. This is actually the touching of the fingers, the famous fingers, because Michelangelo, as a creator, thought that the greatest gift that God gave to us, the things that make us a real image of God, it's the power of creation. So according to Plato's philosophy, you know that Michelangelo grew up in Lorenzo il Magnifico house with the Pico della Mirandola, with other philosophers, Plato and others. So they were, discussing about the nature of things. And at that time, the real philosophy in which everybody was into was Plato's, with this idea of perfection, perfect word, of which the real word, the physical word, is nothing but a copy. So this world was created by God. Why? Not because God needed it, but because God enjoyed himself in the creation of it, and the enjoyment of God in creating the universe and so on, and just contemplating it. So it's an aesthetic pleasure that God gets from us. It doesn't need us at all. Otherwise, it wouldn't be God. Otherwise, it wouldn't be the perfect being. So the same thing is about art. Why Michelangelo does art? Why we do art? We don't need art. We can live without art. We can, all our functions can go ahead with our art. But we need it because it's in art that we reflect ourselves and we please ourselves and we can reflect upon ourselves. So art gives meaning to everything, like, of course, as well, God reflected on the universe through that and through us. So basically, as a creator, Michelangelo found this divine spark in every human being. And God is supported by a number of angels that for Michelangelo are without wings. Apteros is the word in Greek, which means without the wings. Why? In the early centuries, in the catacombs and in other early Christian representation, angels don't have wings. Wings were only used from the Byzantine time, 6th, 7th century AD, because of more biblical studies and also because of some pagan images. So it was like an emerging of different cultures. Michelangelo wants to go back to the origins. So he represents things that he had the chance to study and also gets rid of everything that is not necessary. Also, there's a very precise study on the human body, on the physique. We have these beautiful drawings here. I just have one of them because, of course, I cannot show them all, of the body of, this is like a drawing, a sample, how he created all the volume and he studied. We know Michelangelo befriended the director of one of the hospitals in Florence, Santo Spirito, and was able to dissect bodies and study corpses. Anyway, 4 years it took to paint the whole ceiling. Michelangelo in a letter complains about the physical fatigue and the stress of painting, and all his pupils that originally came to help him were all basically expelled. They were all sent out because he thought, oh no, they're doing a horrible job. Plus, there was there was too much humidity in the ceiling, in the vault, and the fresco turned green. There was some moss growing on, and there were some problems. This is Michelangelo standing. We also know that on the side he probably stand on his back. I have an artist's impression of the scaffolding, although this is the scaffolding of the Last Judgment, but there's one of the ceiling which is a little bit higher. And then, of course, he was working mostly by himself. He had one man by then preparing the colors for him and preparing the wall. Now, just so to remind you, the fresco, it's a painting that is made a small part of a surface at a time because it's made on a wet plaster. If it dries, then it's no good. So you need someone to prepare the plaster. So you have the wall here, the brick wall. You have a very thick level of rough plaster called rizzaffo, and then you have the arriccio, which is a thinner one. So it's about just over an inch, the first one. The second one is just about half of that. And then there's a thinner one, which is the intonaco or intonachino, which is basically a very thin one, about a quarter of an inch, about 5 millimeters. And it's wet, so the color goes in. So even if it gets scratched, the color is still inside the wet plaster, and that's how the colors stay for so long. But of course, you can only paint a small surface because then once it's dry, the colors won't penetrate it, and it's not good. One of the problems with the restoration is that some of the finishing touches are then done afterwards, especially such a large surface. This one is before and after the cleaning. Always made me think of those advertisements about the washing powder. Before and after, and it is something like that. But what happens if you don't use the right washing stuff? If it's too aggressive, you take off the color or you take off some of the detail. And this is some of the criticisms that has been done. So of course, some of the details were lost. So like the screen, this weight thing and the scroll were lost. But for example, some of the shading here that was on the left, which probably was made with just with a candle, so it's called nero fumo, black with the smoke, which is used as the final touching on a dry wall afterwards, is lost. And here, it's so bright and you can't really see it. There is, if you have about $15,000 to shed, there is a book which was published in only 1,000 copies. About 15 years ago, with the 100% scale reproduction of one-to-one scale reproduction of the details of the chapel, where you could see all the details, the fillings, the repaintings, the details of every of it. It's it takes two big men to lift it. It's a very heavy book, and there's a collector edition made a few years ago. Anyway, when Colalucci and his team made the restoration, they also had to fill a number of gaps, a number of cracks, a number of other details. This is the Adam and Eve and the apple, and then the snake and the center way of the Garden of Eden. You could see all the technology that was used. The restoration, it cost millions and was made thanks to the support of many donors, including the Japanese National Network, that for a few years had also the royalties on the actual images. So this is the Eve created from the rib of Adam, with all the troubles that started from them for mankind. And I'm sure every married man in this virtual tour can relate to that. It's just a little A little joke. And then here you could see the temptation. Eve basically has a physical structure more of a man than a woman. You see, Michelangelo designed the bodies all with the same framing, and then just adds female or male attributes. This always made me reflect about his way of proceeding. And the background is almost completely missing. If we compare it with the 1400s paintings with the a number of details, background, flowers, people, towns, cities, Michelangelo is not bothered. He doesn't care about that. He just wants the bodies. He considered himself a sculptor, and his way of painting, and also the way as if it was taking off rather than putting on. And that's why all the figures are completely naked. And you could see this comparison between before and after the original scene. Their faces are completely transformed. So it's the transformation that appeared in the scene. There's so much theological information, so much philosophical aspects in very simple figures. So, and this was only possible because Michelangelo was a very cultivated man. He actually started the decoration from the far wall, so the exit one. In fact, on the other side here, episodes of the life of Noah, they are much smaller, the figures, including the prophet Zacharias. You see how small it is compared to the other side where we have Jonas, which is huge. This is because it took 2.5 years to make the first half. Then he took the scaffolding down and he started the other half. When he saw from about distance of 20 meters, about 65 feet from the floor to the ceiling, he realized that basically the figures were too small. There's a part missing here. There are many parts that have been repainted over the centuries and damaged because of cracks, because of the centuries. So by 1570s, many were repainted. Like these ones here were destroyed completely when the actual door came down, nearly killing the Pope at the time. That then later on it collapsed in 1522. In 1570s, they were repainted after being damaged for so long. So was probably these other wall, which look very different. Now, Michelangelo completed the ceiling in about 4 years, and then went back to Florence and was happy like that. This is Michelangelo's portrait. And he was called by another pope by 1530s to come back to Rome and finish what he started. Now, I want to show you a picture of how it was the chapel before. This is another picture of how the chapel was before the restoration, because I want to give you a better idea. And then I have, let me see if it's open. Yeah, you see, this is a picture. It's not a very good picture, but it's like 1960s or 1970s. You see how dark it was. Yeah, it looked like a complete different scene compared to the brightness today. And it was because there was a thick level of oil that and fat and dust and darkening effects. Now I have a few more things. Let me see if I can find the. So first of all, I need this, and then I want to show you the Pope. Oh, this is his. Clement VII was a childhood friend of Michelangelo because he was the cousin of Pope Leo X, which was Giovanni de' Medici. Leo X was Lorenzo Magnifico's son, and he became Pope and was Pope till the end of till 1516, 1517. And then one of the succeeders was then Pope Clement VII, which was his cousin. He was the son of Giuliano de' Medici. His name was Giulio di Giuliano de' Medici, which was Lorenzo Magnifico's brother. He was the man who was assassinated by the Pazzi conspiracy. So he basically kind of revenged his father by becoming Pope, considering that the Pope was one of the man who conspired after, started the conspiracy after him. Anyway, he was a close friend of Michelangelo because they grew up in the same house, basically, and they knew each other since a very young age, since they were teenagers. So Clement VII wanted Michelangelo to complete the chapel, making the Last Judgment on the last wall. By then, Rome had changed completely. This is another artist's impression of Michelangelo working, in this case, on the ceiling. And the chapel was like this before. So this is the main altar. There was the Assumption of Mary by Pietro Perugino, because the Sistine Chapel is dedicated to the Assumption of Virgin Mary. And then there was the Nativity of Christ, which of course is missing in the series of the life of Christ. And on the other side, the image of the Moses rescued from the waters, of course, the beginning of the life of Moses. And then more popes, and on the top, 4 more ancestors of Christ, which Michelangelo had to paint over, so he had to destroy his own work. So the windows were closed. It took a few time. The Pope died, and his successor was Pope Paul III, the one who started the Catholic Reformation. And Michelangelo came up with this idea of the Last Judgment that I have a better picture here, but I want to show you also from here. We can go actually very close because, no, let me see. Here we are. So you could see how impressive, how big are the figures. This is the door. So it's about 7 feet, or just over 7 feet tall. And you can see that the figures are actually of a real human proportion. So when you get in there, they really look like real, that like the devils are coming after you. There's the angels up there in the sky. There's Jesus Christ here. So it's really intimidating. You really feel them on your head. So the effect to it is really amazing. I mean, we always think of them about in a very intellectual way, but the experience of being there, it's really something amazing. With this one, we can go on the top. I just want to show you a better one. From here, you could see some details of some figures kissing. But let's go back in a more and these are the graffiti. You see this guy here, Vincenzo Dolcimea. Today is a crime. You can go to jail if you make a graffiti on historic wall. But back then it was normal. If you travel, you have to leave your graffiti. It's before pictures, so it was the only way to prove that you've been there. Let's go back to the picture. So the idea Michelangelo came up, it's of course the Pope asked him to make the second return, the return of Christ. So the first one is the resurrection, which was painted actually on the opposite wall by Ghirlandaio, and it was damaged. So Ghirlandaio was the master of Michelangelo, so the Pope must have thought it'd be nice if you do something, after your master. And then there's Jesus Christ here. Look how huge it is, and it's beardless, it's shaved, because it's not the skinny Jesus of the Byzantine tradition. It's like a pagan god. And in fact, Michelangelo was inspired by a Greek statue, which is a Roman copy of a Greek statue, which is preserved, that you can find inside the chapel, and of which I have I do have a picture. Yes, it's the Apollo del Belvedere, which can be found in the Vatican Museum. So I'll just show you 1 and 2. So here you can see the hairstyle, the face, the physical attributes are pretty the same. So except the body, which is much bigger and heavier. So Michelangelo wanted to give this impression of now is not the Jesus that sacrificed for himself. Now is the Jesus of judgment. Even St. Peter and St. Paul are scared. Paul is this one. Peter is giving back the keys because the kingdom of the church will be over by then, the mission of the church. So he's returning the keys to Christ. And there is the Assumption of Mary, the second Assumption, where Mary finally will be sitting on the right of her son, and this is kind of a replacement of the Assumption of Mary was destroyed. Anyway, the whole movement starts from the bottom with the resurrection of the body. Amongst them, there could be found a number of figures that many people had identified with contemporaries, or even Michelangelo himself, probably. This guy here, by many, is considered to be Savonarola, the predicator, which became the leader of the Florentine Revolution by the end of the 1400s, where they kicked out the Medici of Florence and started to burn artworks, music instruments, and eventually they even burned their leader, because it's like a revolution. When you became too much strict, then you ended up to be destroyed by it. In the center there are the 7 trumpets of the apocalypse, with these angels again without the wings, as I said, with 2 books, small one for the ones going to one part of either heaven or hell, and the other ones going to the other side. So what do you think is the list for the heavens, and which one is the list for hell? Which in the big book or the small book? This big list or the small list? Any volunteers? Richard, which one do you think?
I agree with her.
The big one, it's the hell. That's correct. So basically, this one is the list that goes into hell. So quite a negative vision, but it was quite common at the beginning of 1500s, because it came with Lutheranism, with the idea of predestination, which, even though is not a Catholic dogma, it's not a Catholic belief, it was an idea was very popular there. Then the resurrection of the flesh, people coming out of their the tombs. Like here, you could see this kind of skeleton, and then up here, bodies going up, people helping them out. There's a lot of big, heavy bodies. There's this idea that the body is a kind of a burden, but even during the resurrection. And then you have here a number of different figures. Some of them are really amazing, the detail. So there are at least about 300 full figures painted by Michelangelo. It took about 7 years in total to paint it all, including 1 year preparation of the wall, preparation with the oil painting that he tried to do, but he failed. So he then went back to the egg-based tempera. At that time, it was a time where they started to swap the technology from the colors made by dusting different minerals and then use as a bound material the egg whites, so the egg-based tempera, or the yolks in depending on the color, and to the oil, which is made with different type of oil, nuts oil or different kind of seeds oil, which had a much bigger variety of colors and shades, which Michelangelo used for the devils down here, and then also was allowing them to do a lot more details, a lot more finishing, and also reworking the same time many times without having to paint over like it was with the tempera, because once the tempera was dry, it's dry, while the oil can be reworked. The blue background was made using lapis, which was very expensive. It was as expensive as gold because it only came from one place back then, which was Afghanistan, which was very difficult to get, of course, so this is a bit of lapis. You might have jewels of that. Now there are other quarters in the world, but at that time the only ones were Afghanistan, which of course wasn't easy to reach. Michelangelo even portrayed himself as an empty skin. It's this one here. So we can find him here. And this is San Bartolome, which was basically skin alive. They took his skin off while he was alive. And he's holding his own skin, which is quite a canonical vision for him. But why Michelangelo put himself like that? It's clearly his portrait. You could see it's clearly him. I show you the picture here, 1 and 2, and of course they overlap. You could see it's him. It's basically the beard, the kind of the hair, and we have description from contemporaries, Vasari, Condivi, other historians that tell us that. Because probably he thought that he was a sinner. He had a lot of personal, of course, issues, sexual issues, and maybe religious. He was a true believer, but he has a lot of personal issues. And so probably he, with the spear of salvation, but he knew that his soul was pure because, as we saw before, it was a creator of beauty, and the creator of beauty comes from God. So there was a divine spark in him. So he could not be totally lost. Probably needed totally saved. I think it's a very clever way to put him. There are other historians that believe that actually these are other characters, or probably the Michelangelo is owned by the skin from this guy, which was the portrait of this man here, Pietro Aretino, which was the official poet of the church at the time, till he had to flee Rome because he had some arguments with the Pope, and which was a satirical poet, which criticized the nudity and the obscenity in the fresco. In fact, if you look, figures are naked, and even with the original fresco had a lot more naked figures which are covered at the second time. This is a copy, it's not a very good one, made by Marcello Venusti. It's in Naples, in the Museo di Capodimonte, which is a beautiful art collection. If you have the chance to go back to Naples one day, I highly recommend that. So Naples is a lot more than pizza, pasta, and what everybody thinks it is. But it's also beautiful museums, the Archaeological Museum, churches. So this is the Vision of Christ. You can see all this bunch of saints here. They all naked with no, slippers, anything, just, naked. Because for Michelangelo, heaven is like a nudist place. Of course, if you resurrect without your clothing on, because you'd be like before the original sin. So, of course, there won't be any, bad thinking or any problem with nudity, because there won't be any of that in heavens. And in hell, there will be different problems than putting clothes on, I guess. Anyway, so so the nudities were covered later by an artist called Daniele Volterra, which was a great artist, was one of the greatest artists of the second half of the 1500s. And the frescoes, had a number of criticisms as soon as they were finished. Michelangelo finished them in 1541. By 1560s, they asked him to cover them, and the Pope and Michelangelo said to the Pope, "Look, I'm not going to do it. First of all, because I'm too old. It was it was 80 something. It was just a year or 2 years before he died, so he was nearly 90. So he said, I'm not going to go up on a scaffolding. Second, it's only a bit of pain. The church had much bigger problems than fixing, the needs of the chapel. It needs to fix other issues, corruption, bribery, a number of other problems that the church had. So basically, his response, he sent it back to the Pope. And so Daniele Volterra did that. And since then, he's been known as the Braghettone. Actually, he didn't do all of it. Some others were added later. And during the last restoration, some of them have been taken off. Most of them have been left because by then they thought it was the way, it is passed down to generations. There's been a lot of discussion about that too. Anyway, the angels here carrying the cross of Jesus Christ, the crown of thorns, and a column, in a way that is they look like they're flying in a storm. It's not the way you would show to people. You not show to crown an holy object, a relic. It's a different way. It's like a dance. So probably, there's a different meaning that Michelangelo wants to give it to that. So I leave that open to you. There's a number of theories about that. And then there's this figures kissing each other, holding each other, happy to be in the heavens. So when they will be part of the love of God. Down here, martyrs, people which show the tools through which they were killed for their faith. St. Catherine, St. Biagio, these two had to completely be repainted because the position of St. Catherine and St. Biagio were thought to be too sexual, or they like simulating sexual intercourse. So they just decided to repaint them. So they were completely recovered. And this is St. Sebastian here on his knees. These are the 7 deadly sins represented as an allegory. I'll show you a couple. Greed, with a man pulled down upside down by a bag of coins. Greed is upside down because money, they subvert the natural order of values, in the world. So that's why money pulls us down to hell. And I think it's a very clever representation of greed. And down here, there's lust, someone pulled down by his genitals. And gluttony, a man with a thirst in his mouth, and so on. And down here, this is known as the desperation, or the idea that there's no escape from sin. He's so scared. He's pulled down by these devils and has been bitten by this snake or dragon. It's like the idea, the snake symbolizes again the original sin, the temptation of Eve. There's this idea that we cannot escape our mortal fate of being susceptible to sin and to damnation. So it's always been considered a very negative masterpiece, this, although there is salvation, there is faith. So we have to think that in 1527, Rome was under a sack by the imperial troops, which didn't get paid by the emperor. So they decided to take their own money from the city of Rome. So they spent a year in Rome, and the Pope was Clement VII, spent like a year in St. Angel Castle before surrendering and paying whatever ransom they were asking. So it was really a tragic. The biggest tragic in the Italian Renaissance, or in European Renaissance, I would say. And down here, the gates of hell. Now, Michelangelo is a master of representing the terror that comes from hell. He doesn't represent the actual hell. We don't see any part of hell here, just the idea of hell. There's some red fumes here, clouds, the devils, the fight of the different sinners scared and beaten by Charon, the devil, beating them off the ship, the boatman, other figures here. I want to show you a painting because Michelangelo is a genius, not just because he was very good at painting stuff, because he wasn't the only one. At that time, every artist who had a good training, they could paint fairly well, but because the idea of inventing, of suggesting, of creating solution or representing things that have never been done before. And now I've lost the point of what I was trying to show you. And I have just a couple more things and then I'll be done. Where is it now? What was I was going to? Yeah, there is a painting that I can't find here. I want to show you. It's basically, it's not this one we need. because it's the devil minus this, and then also we have the boat. I want to show you the first painting that Michelangelo ever did. It might be in another, maybe it might be in another. Let me see. Michelangelo, I have too much stuff here. It might be here. No, anyway, it's the first painting by Michelangelo, which is basically the Temptation of St. Anthony. It's a copy from a German painter. I might have it here because I have it somewhere. You will find it in the quiz. By the way, at the end of this tour, you will receive an email with the quiz, so you can go online and take the quiz. And there is a surprise at the end, but don't. Anyway, in this I can't find it. In this painting, he puts a lot of elements, fish scales, different type of elements and details that are really, really interesting. And he went to the fish market. He was only 14 or 15 when he made that painting, and basically he was using some animal elements from here. If you look at the wings here, this is study, this is actual real wing, and then the snakes and other body. So he had a deep study, not just on the body, but also on the natural aspects. Whenever he did that, these monsters also have some animal features, the horns and other parts of these devils. Anyway, the devils that are, kicking each other out of and then pulling down the saints to the gates of hell. And then at the gates of hell, we have Minos with the donkey ears and the snake around his body. He is the one that Dante Alighieri, the great Florentine poet, put in at the entrance of hell. He is the judge who weights the souls and tells them to which part of the hell they are destined to. And Biagio da Cesena was the master of ceremonies of the Pope, visited the chapel with the Pope a few months before it was about to finish. And the Pope asked him, "Oh, what do you think of this fresco?" And he said, "This is horrible. This is pornography. And, he should be covered." Anyway, Michelangelo had his revenge. They had a little, rough talk then. But then I think he insulted him in front of the Pope. He said it was just a stupid... he wasn't skilled enough to understand painting. And so basically Michelangelo portrayed himself as a devil naked right next to the altar. So November the 1st, 1541, when the chapel was used again after being closed for many months for the restoration, for the painting to be made, the fresco to be made, everybody could see that the man who was serving mass with the Pope on the altar was actually portrayed there naked as a devil. So everybody was mad at him and laughed at him for generations. We have description of people really making, comments about that thing. And especially the fact that he created such a grand vision with over 300 figures, just full figures, and then there's another 100 or 200, so probably up to 500 different figures, including random heads and parts of the bodies that pop in around in there. Now, as Pope John Paul II said, this is one of the most important places. It certainly is for the Catholics, but certainly it's for the popes, because the popes get elected here. I just have a couple more information about the Pope election, and then I will be open to question time. This is when it is all prepared with all the cardinals, which are just over 100 now, 120. In the 1500s, there were only 20, 25, 17 conclaves, so there weren't that many as there are now. Of course, they reflect a much bigger church. This is a cross-section of how the chapel is when it's all set up, including the stove for the smoke, the white smoke, and the black smoke, which is made using chemicals now. They use wet hay in the past, but for the last 30 years they've been using, of course, artificial coloring. And then during the main, in the past, in the 1500s, they even hang at the bottom, and the bottom level, where they have those painting curtains, the tapestries made by Raphael, designed by Raphael, made by President Van Est in 1520s. And they're beautiful. They only been hung every 10, 15 years now. Last time was the February this year to mark the 500 years since Raphael's death. So just a couple of weeks before the the lockdown. And this is the stove, which is only temporary. It's not normally there. They only display what they need, which is every time they have to make another pope. And then the last thing is a secret little room, which is not really secret, but if you take the super special VIP tours with the Vatican, expert, they sometimes offer to enter in this room here on the left. This is the entrance room from the museums, and that is the room to the sacristy. It's called the room of the crying, of the lacrimazione, because the 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 popes get dressed in there for the very first time with the white papal outfit. This is a number of outfits, like in a sacristy. This is actually what you can find in that room. So coming down from basically this door here on the left, this part of the floor, it's not symmetrical because this is where the Pope throne is on the side compared to the altar. So that's why it's got this shape. And then down here on the left, I'll show you, there is this room that leads then, that leads then to several other rooms, now 2 or 3, including where they store the chemicals to color the smoke. This room was actually red in 1980s, then been repainted white, and the only red thing is like this chair. And this is the place where the Pope get dressed for the very first time. Now, as they say in the Vatican, if the cardinals are inspired by God, so they know who to vote, well, the tailors of the Pope, they're not. So they don't know who's going to be the Pope, which sides is going to wear. So they have to prepare 3 different sets of 3 different sides, which are already there. And the Pope, according to the size. Sometimes they get it right, sometimes not. John 23rd in 1960s, when he was elected, he was it was too fat. He didn't fit in it. So they had to find someone last minute to just try to fix his outfit. The meaning, the message of the chapel as it is in the complex. Well, John Paul II was the one who gave the speech after the chapel was restored, and we can admire it in all its beauty now. And definitely the main idea of the chapel is that it's a complete representation of the history of the project of salvation, the project that God had for us, from the very creation, the separation of dark and light, to the creation of the planets, of human being, the deluge, and then the Judaism, the Christianism, and of course the church with the popes, and in the end with the last judgment, which is the moment of truth. And Michelangelo was the genius that was able to complete and interpret this chapel in a way that went beyond the Western art, Western culture. It's probably one of the most important masterpieces on earth, and visited by millions of people every year. Last year there were some 6-7 million visitors. And the thing that I personally love most about the Sistine Chapel, especially about the Last Judgment, is the fact that in here you find the complete spectrum of reaction to the moment of truth, the Last Judgment, the moment where, we will all be facing, for who believes or who doesn't believe, but the moment of death where you face your own truth, wherever you've been, whatever you've done in your life. That's a moment of when everything comes to an end and everything finds its own meaning. And so that's why there are people scared, people that fight not to do that, people who accept it, people who are happy because they found peace. And so there's the complete range of feelings, because we're made of feelings, and that's what we put when we are actually that's what an artist put whenever he's asked. The last thing I ever mentioned is in this corners here, there are the 4 episodes when God saved Israel: Moses and the gilded bronze, Esther and Asuero. On the other side, David and Goliath, down here on the right, and Judith and Holofernes. And the last one, the coat of arms of the Della Rovere family. This dates back to the Pope who built the chapel. It dates back to the 1400s. Now, I'm finished my presentation. I've gone a little bit over time, but I have a few minutes for question time. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them. I would like to thank everybody. Let's open everybody. Let's make a big noise. Let's how do you unmute everybody? You can unmute yourself if you want to make a bit of. Do you want to say anything? Do you want to?
Hi, Mario. This is Tiana. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. Hello.
Okay, this is Siana. I am from the middle of Europe, Czech Republic, from Prague.
Thank
And I
you.
would like to thank you very, very much for the great presentation. It just brought me back to the time when I visited the chapel in person many, many years ago.
Oh,
So
thank you. Thank you. I
really
appreciate it.
great job. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much and stay healthy. Good luck. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Is any question, anything that you would like to bring up? And I can see a few faces. So I want to show you something else. I'm not sure if I can, if the volume works. I have a last thing I want to show you. Let me see if I can share this share screen, and let's see if I can. You tell me if you can hear the audio of this. Can you hear it?
No.
No, not the sound.
Just picture.
Let me just check. I just want to. Where is it? Sound option. This is from Will Hunter. It's a movie with Robin Williams. You can see, and a very young Matt Damon. It talks about this young man which has a lot of trouble, and he is let me just check the audio here.
Hi, Sal.
Okay, can you hear me now? Can you hear it now?
No.
Can you hear it now? No?
No.
No.
Probably not.
Let me just try again. Sorry, but I let me just, it should be here, audio settings. Let me, audio set. So, advanced. How do you, I had it once, but I can. Anyway, this you can Google it. It's Good Will Hunting, and Robbie Williams has said, if I ask you about art, you know, Michelangelo, you know a lot about him, his work, political aspirations, the relation with the Pope, sexual orientation. But if I ask you what it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel, you don't know about it because you don't have experience of life. He's a psychologist who's trying to teach this troubled kid about life, about things, and so it brings up the Sistine Chapel and how it smells like inside the Sistine Chapel. So I will my wish to you is that soon we can all resume travel and you can come back to Italy and visit Rome, the Sistine Chapel, and find out how it smells like in the Sistine Chapel. Depends who's been there, what time of the day you go in there. Doesn't smell good most of the time, unfortunately.
That's sure.
Okay, so any more questions or?
Well, thank you so much, Mario.
Thank you, Richard. I'll see you in a few minutes.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Bertrand? I can see Bertrand there. Felix?
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that was fantastic.
Bertrand is my, Bertrand, show your face. Bertrand is my colleague from Paris. He has a company like I do, is wonderful tour operator, wonderful private guy. It's probably the only Frenchman I like, and great guy. And my close friend, he has a fantastic company. It's called My Private Tours, and he's been doing some wonderful video tours, Zoom tours as well. I saw Versailles the other day. The Seine, how did it go? You did an outdoors ones the other night.
Yeah, we're allowed to walk now, so we did it live from the riverbanks.
Nice. Yeah.
It was fun.
Was it busy? No, not very busy, wasn't it?
Oh no, it's very busy. Yeah.
Oh,
I think we'll get to lockdown number 2 soon.
Yeah, no, that's the same. They're afraid in Italy too. They're opening again tomorrow, barbers and a number of shops, but they're not sure. Oh, hopefully people get careful and everything will go.
I think so.
Yeah, we'll go fine again. Anyway, there's a tour I started to think about the history of pandemics and things, but then I thought maybe people want to hear something different than another plagues and things, or the plague, the Antonine plague that many historians believe was one of the elements that took down the Roman Empire. So you might have probably, it's better to talk about art, about Michelangelo, about divine things and so on. Okay, so thank you everybody. You have received an email with the link to the quiz. I show you it's on the website, so you can just go there and play with that. If you have family, friends you want to share it with, most of the questions are about things I've said. Some of them are like not general knowledge of things that people, need to, really be having to look for it because they're not something that you normally will hear about that. I like doing this virtual tours because also you can show a number of details that you can't do that where you are actually in a tour in the Vatican. It's a very crowded place. You're always in a hurry. You always like cram with other groups. So it's really, really, I think it's a very nice and good pre-tour and also a post-tour thing to do. So I think it will stay. What do you think, Bertrand? I think there's Federica, are you there? There's another colleague from Venice. Are you there? Can you hear me? Ciao? No, she's gone.
I think you're right. I think it's a great way to prepare a trip. So or to travel again. I mean, from home, of course. But it's definitely great to be able to show details that otherwise you would not see when you're there.
Yeah, and also you could see your guide before you get there. You can get to know them. You could see that they're speaking
You lose
English.
a lot of business with that.
No, you could see that. No, I have a lot of you're good looking.
Working on this.
Okay then. So
thank you very much.
Good night, everybody, or good evening, and stay in touch. It's been good to see you. I see Vic. We haven't met for years. It's been maybe 15 years since you came to Rome. No, maybe more. I was a kid. Now I'm big. I love this. Ciao Alessandro. Ciao Maria. It's very good to be in touch. Ciao Gino. It's very good to be in touch and to see people I haven't seen for years. Thank you everybody for being here.
Thank you very much again, and good luck to you, Mario.
Thank you. I'll send you an email.
Bye bye. Ciao, ciao.
Ciao. Good night. Thank you very much. Thank you.